What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm a game designer on the Summoner's Rift team. We are the team responsible for the patch notes you see every couple of weeks. Well, largely anyway, most of the gameplay changes. Anyway, I'm here to talk about why it's really hard to balance for pro play, and also preview the world's meta a little bit here. So, for context, I was the designer most in charge of we'll go with molding the world's metagame in terms of what kind of balance changes we should or shouldn't go for. There's some things that I suggested that we do specifically. People were like, okay. There's some things where I pushed back and said, I know you have good reasons for making this change. We shouldn't do it either at all or not yet. And so any random outliers you can certainly blame me for, though certainly I have bosses. Well, boss singular, but I'm certainly not the most senior designer on League of Legends by any means. The ability to overrule me is absolutely there and is part of the power of my boss, for example, but ultimately was entrusted to make good choices. I was also the designer in charge of MSI balance, and outside of only seeing, I think, 9 unique AD carries over the tournament, largely we were really successful, I think, in terms of having a pretty captivating MSI, the exception being that the finals ended up only having 3 viable AD carries as far as people were concerned, and so it was basically Lucian was permabanned into being Jinx versus Aphelios. So there are actually 3 really, really good AD carries, but they banned 1 and picked the 2 hyper carries. So that part was unfortunate. I could have probably seen that coming and made some earlier changes to these champions to have a more diverse set of champions in the bot lane. Hoping to learn from that here, and we'll talk about how and why. But overall, I think we're going to be headed into a very diverse, very successful metagame here at Worlds, and I'm going to walk you through what I was looking at throughout the split, what kind of suggestions I was making, what I was looking at data-wise. There's more considerations here. I don't want this to go on forever, but I also just want to talk about what's really difficult about trying to craft a pro meta. I don't want this to sound like a complaint or an insult to pro players, because they're obviously working as hard as they can. They're going to do the very best that they can, but I want to point out that pros do not instantly know the impact of all changes, and they can't. Of course they can't. And so it will take time for them to actually follow on to the actual effects of changes over time. I have a couple examples of that in this sort of mini presentation here, but let's talk about the fact that pro is really hard to balance for and preview the world's metagame somewhat. So the first reason why it's really hard is 13.13 is the last patch that every major league played on. This patch came out in June. Worlds is played in October. This is the last time we saw every major league play on the same patch. So, it's tough. There's like almost 3 months worth of changes that, we can't guarantee the magnitude on. We know what the solo queue win rate was. We can look with enough data what the Masters Plus to Challenger, solo queue win rate change is. But at the end of the day, even changes that are win rate neutral will have incredibly large impacts on pro play, despite being the same power level for at-home play. So it's real tough. Obviously, we're going to do the best thing that we can. We have a decent vocabulary of things that are going to be really pro-skewed, decent set of theories of things we can work around, but ultimately, this is, if there's any one point you need, is this point, which is that, wow, the pro patch cycle was really, really weird this split. So 30.13 was the last patch that every league played on, and here's what they played. Well, the most played thing that they played was Kaisa. She was 94% present on 13.13, and the way this works, by the way, is pro gets the patch a week late, right? There is a minimum 1 week waiting period before the patch going live, and pro play getting the patch, and we lock a patch 1 week before it goes live, which means even if everything happened instantaneously, we lock 13.14 before a single game is played on 13.13. And that's if these leagues play on Wednesday morning, which they don't. So it is impossible. And that's assuming we're like, oh yes, we're going to, right before branch cut, seeing 3 games of League of Legends played. The LPL regular season played a best of 3. We're going to make some pro teams based on exactly you two. These 2 teams, what they drafted, they had Jace Prio, we're nerfing Jace off of 1 best of 3. Clearly not acceptable, right? So that means, with any of this data, the earliest we could possibly react is 13.15. Now, I want to point out that 13.13, among other things, was the LPL playoff patch, which means they played on this patch for a very, 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 very long time. So things that may have shown up later on in their playoff run can't be represented in 0.15 because they didn't happen yet. Maybe they get represented in 0.16, maybe 0.17, but like we don't even have all the 13.13 data when we're neither planning nor finalizing that patch 13.15. But either way, Kaisa was the most present pro champion in this patch. And we, in fact, nerfed her right away. We nerfed her in 13.15. Now, unfortunately, 13.15 was played in only the LEC. The LCK and LCS stopped in 13.14. The LPL never even went into 13.14, but we nerfed her health, we nerfed her QAP ratio, we nerfed the W cooldown on W evolve. The point here was to heavily nerf AP Kaisa, because I think AP Kaisa has pretty poor gameplay. I think we're really happy with hybrid Kaisa, so we can't crush her AP ratios everywhere. She should want to evolve W. She should want to build Nashor's Tooth. She probably should actually want to buy Rage Blade. It makes her a very unique champion. It gives her a cool place. It lets her use her entire kit very well, but we had to be careful there, so we nerfed some stuff that we knew would affect pro play a fair bit, and we can talk about the results of that later on. And we nerfed things that were very AP focused to try to make her have to play more for auto attacks, even if she did build ability power. Next thing up was Rel, and Rel was also 94% present, so a really, really big deal. And so, once again, we nerfed her pretty much as soon as we could. We nerfed her 13.15, but again, this is a patch that only happened in LEC. And I want to point out, by the way, 13.15 was actually a set of bug fixes. These bug fixes ended up actually taking out some win rate because they made several of her spells deal damage before the armor MR shred, which ended up having a pretty meaningful impact on win rate because her damage is just, up against 3 to 4% more magic resist, 2% something around there, 2% or so more magic resist than before, which is not trivial. It is she does more damage, or less damage as a result of this change. So obviously no one's going to read this patch note and say, oh, we should lower our rel prio, but it was win rate negative. Then in 13.17, her most common mythic, which is Even Shroud, was nerfed, and then we nerfed her again in 13.18 because even with these changes, her win rate was still high enough, her ban rate is still high enough that we chose to nerf her in largely triggered by elite play, but also aware that she was going to be probably the highest prio pro support, and we didn't want Rel as the number one pro support. Ultimately, also, again, had room to balance for solo queue. I don't want to say, Rel can't be number one, but just, there were enough good reasons to nerf Rel that we did, and so we nerfed her in 13.18. LeBlanc was also basically tied first, 94% present in this patch. Another champion that we, in fact, affected. We had already nerfed, this was, I believe, the 50%. This was 30% making 15% AP ratio, I believe, on the PvP damage. And then we did some follow-up nerfs to Shiv down the line, really trying to get rid of some of the wave clear impact of this item. But ultimately, right, since, LeBlanc being 94% presence back in this patch, the last time we saw every league play on it, Statikk Shiv has been nerfed for LeBlanc 3 times in a row. LeBlanc has been the only consistent mage who can use Statikk Shiv well. Many of these changes weren't needed if it weren't for LeBlanc uniquely abusing this item very, very strongly. But we saw things like Day 1 Ken and Statikk Shiv, and this was never very successful. Same with Akali. They weren't actually strong builds. People eventually hopped off them pretty quickly. LeBlanc was the only one that was actually good, and I think at this point we finally nerfed it to where it's not dominant anymore. But of course, we could have acted sooner. We could have definitely acted sooner. But regardless, even though we had nerfed Shiv in 0.14, well, the LPL never moved past that point, and so, we never had any further data. Number 4 champion of this patch was actually Tristana. And Tristana kind of came out of a little bit nowhere, so 85% present in this patch. You can see it actually will climb over time. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But we adjusted her in 0.16, so we adjusted her one patch late based on this presence. Again, we'll talk about her trajectory a little bit later, but not a single pro league has played on this patch. Tristana lost, it was either 20 or 30 health, as well as, 2 to 4 magic resist. I forget the numbers off the top of my head. This ended up being around 4% less durability against magic damage. Tristana's weak matchups tend to be burst mages, champions like Syndra, who, by the way, were buffing in 13.19. But Tristana is counterpickable, and through a mix of making sure other mages are strong, there's a buff to arm guard. The theory is that Tristana should be in a reasonable spot, though she obviously has been a very, very highly present mid laner. Again, arm guard buffed in 13.19. She was personally adjusted in 13.16. We can take a quick tour around Tristana's presence, right? Well, 13.11, very, very low presence. 13.12 certainly shot up out of nowhere, but this is only one patch of data. And then 13.13, now again, there's a very long lag at 13.13 because the LPL playoffs took, 4 weeks or something like that? Took a very, very long time, and, we lock 13.15 well before the LPL playoffs are done, right? So the earliest we could have seen that there were 2 patches in a row with high presence was 13.15. And so we could have been like, oh, actually, yeah, she's been big for 2 patches in a row. We should really try to do something about this one. And we didn't do a 15, we did it in 0.16. But we can see, of course, that there were 2 more patches. And so seeing that, wow, it jumped from 20 to 80 and then it remained at 80, we could have nerfed 1 patch sooner. That is absolutely true. We absolutely could have looked at this and done 1 patch sooner, assuming the LPL data was up to date initially and they were instantly playing at this level. My understanding, though, is LPL actually adopted 0.13 a little bit late. There was some bug in 0.13, so they actually reverted back to 0.12 for a couple of regular season days and then moved to 13 a little bit later. So we didn't have a lot of extra data on 13. We got late data from LPL in 0.13. So maybe we actually couldn't have done this until 0.16. Regardless, though, we did eventually nerf Tristana. Number 5 champion in that patch was Rakan. And honestly, I've been a Rakan defender for quite a while. I think, so the way I'll phrase this is, obviously on a pro level, we absolutely, and I will not hide this anyway, we absolutely intentionally curate pro play. We are the shepherds of game balance, right? It is literally our job to balance the game in the ways that we think make the best game. And I want to be clear, the goal of a game, League of Legends no exception, is to be fun to play. Not literally every game is meant to be fun. There's all kinds of emotions games can bring out of you, but League of Legends is meant to be a competitive, exciting, fun game to play. Which means that is a more important rule than the game is balanced. Rock, paper, scissors is perfectly balanced. It is less fun than League of Legends. League of Legends is less balanced, more fun. And I'm not saying we're going to create imbalances to create the fun, but balance is not the number one goal, or you wouldn't be playing any you wouldn't even play chess, because I'm pretty sure the first move has an advantage there. Guess what? Games aren't balanced. This is just how it works. This is just true. This is just a fact of things. The point is we should create good gameplay experiences. I believe the short of it is Rakan creates good gameplay experiences. I could go on for a long time on defending this, but this is the point I'm making. Rakan creates good gameplay experiences. If Rakan is among the most popular champions in pro play, good. Someone's going to be number 1. Someone's going to be the number 1 champion in any given role. That is going to be true. If I can choose, or at least have a good idea of who the likely top 2 or 3 are, that is better than it being at random. If I expect Rakan to be the number 1 pro support, great. That is one of the better options. I will not handpick Rakan in any given meta and say Rakan must be number 1, but looking at player base behaviors, what they like picking, what they ban when it's popular, Rakan scores really, really well on these metrics. An easy comparison point, this is not to trash Rel, but it's just a very easy direct comparison. Rel is actually a more common, more popular pro play pick. Now, in pro play, Rel is a jungle support flex. She has almost exactly the same play rate in pro play in jungle and support. Her ban rate, of course, is quite high, but she's still in a lot of games, and she's played equally in jungle and support. In solo queue, even in challenger, it's 10-1 support. It's actually more like 12-1 support. Even highly skilled players don't seem to want to play Rel jungle. That's fine. We're happy to support it. Some players do. That's fine. That's not a problem. But it means that in solo queue, even really, really, really high elo solo queue, she's not actually much of a flex pick. The jungle to support ratio barely changes with MMR. It's still over 10-1 everywhere. Last I recall. This is I looked it up a couple weeks ago, but this is about right. But in pro play, they flex Rel. Okay, whatever. Anyway, the point is that even accounting for jungle pick rate, Rel is less popular to play than Rakan. That's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But despite having very similar win rates and relatively similar pick rates, though Rakan is more popular, Rel eats more bans than Rakan does. They win the same number of games. You actually face Rakan more than you face Rel. And players, even the exceptionally skilled ones in Challenger, still ban Rel more. Which means these highly skilled players are, relative to his power level and popularity, quite comfortable facing Rakan. This means there is not, in my mind, much of a rush to nerf Rakan. He seems to create good game states for the players who play him. He's very popular. He seems to create good game states for his opponents. They don't ban him. And in my opinion, as the one most in charge of pro play balance, I think Rakan is a very interesting pro to watch in pro play. And I've been professionally casting League of Legends since 2011. So I'm not saying my opinion matters more than yours, but I have watched a lot of pro League of Legends, and in general, I like watching Rakan. So yeah, Rakan is the number 5 present support in 13.13, and my notes here are good. I'm glad. Number 6 most present champion was Maokai. He was nerfed in 13.15. There's a trend here, right? These are actually getting nerfed. Sejuani was the 7th most present champion in this patch, and she was also nerfed in 13.15. And 13.15, of course, only had LEC games. Zaya ended up rising in popularity. We ended up nerfing her back in 13.18. This is a more recent change. Part of this is when we started planning out patch 13.16-17, we took stock of the fact that we knew there weren't going to be any pro games on any of these patches. So if we didn't do it in 0.15, there was no rush. We could wait until 0.19 and either take longer with the changes. We want to do something a little bit bigger or anything else here. But essentially, like, once we knew, it's like, well, no one else is going to be on these patches. We can wait. And Zaya is not a solo queue problem. She is sub 50% win rate everywhere. That doesn't mean she is necessarily not strong or that Zaya shouldn't be a 49 or 48.5 or something win rate champion, but there was no solo queue urgency, and there literally wasn't pro play urgency, so we delayed the changes till 0.18, but we eventually made Zaya changes on that patch, and we can look at where her pick rate trended, right? And you can see it was up and to the right. On 11 it was 49, then it was 59, then it was 77, and then it was 91, and then it was finally 90 plus for 2 patches in a row. And so again, the earliest we could have, if we used the 80% cutoff threshold, was 13.17. And you could say, like, Riot, you're seeing this win rate go up, and you're seeing the win rate go up, you're seeing the win rate go up. Why wouldn't you make changes sooner? Why wouldn't you get a change in when you're seeing, 49 to, I mean, if we did 49 to 59, there was no way we do this change in 13.14, right? This is not the data where we say we should change it to 13.14. If we see this data, maybe, if you really, really, really wanted an excuse to nerf 80 carries constantly, we could have maybe gotten a change for 0.15. But I would say this is not the line that you're like, we should absolutely make this change right now, right away. The LEC playoffs are not allowed to have Zaya be strong. I mean, there's an argument there, right? I think if someone went really strongly, I wouldn't have, like, shot it down. But, like, this is not, the strongest inclination that this champion is going to be incredible. And then again, it really plateaus. We see the the LCK LCS patch. We see the LEC patch. And yes, we in fact make changes here. Now, the funny thing is, we look at this. Guess who's next? Jace. So, of course, Jace had a Duskblade nerf in 0.16 and 0.17. Of course, this was well after his playoff run. We're also buffing Armguard in 13.19 as an extra outlet to attack damage mids. But you'll notice that Jace's pick rate data looks a whole lot like Zaya's. 37, 49, 77, right? This looks a whole lot like this. In fact, it's rising faster, right? It's plus 12% and then plus like 30. Wow, Jace is an even bigger deal. An even bigger deal than Zaya. And by the way, Duskblade, not affected. Duskblade was in 16 and 17, right? Jace's data looks even more urgent than Zaya's data. What happened with Jace? Oh, he fell off a cliff. Now, to be fair, the LPL plays a lot of Jace. A lot of this pick rate is driven by the LPL, specifically in playoffs. Again, this is LCK, LCS. He's only at 60. Their postseason. This is LEC postseason. It's only at 48. But, like, well, 3 of the other big leagues around the world play Jace an acceptable amount. And again, this is before the Duskblade changes. This is just Jace goes on this trajectory and then falls back down. And we can look by region. Actually, overall, this is across the split, by the way, LCS actually plays the most Jace. LPL across the split plays the second most Jace. LEC 49, exact same presence that he had in the playoffs, right? LEC just plays some Jace. They play some Jace. LCK plays a little Jace. Okay, right? A little thing later around using only 1 league's worth of data, but it's like, hey, which way is Jace going? Not only is there a mandatory 2-patch lag, but also sometimes they'll just stop playing him. So, that's fine. Right, so we can move on. The 10th most played champion in the patch was Renekton. And you can again see the shape here where, right, 59 becomes 89. It's like, wow, okay, he was really, really big in 13.12, but obviously top lane changes happened over the course of time, right? Things moved up and down and whatnot. He went down to 77. He stayed at 73. We go to specifically the LEC postseason, and he's 94 again, higher than he's been for the rest of the year. Now, but to be fair, though, this is just the playoffs. So we're measuring just, what, 6 or 8 teams? I think 6 teams. In just the LEC. So, is this representative? I mean, it's the better teams, right? It's the 6 best teams from the 3rd best region in the world. It's better data than, 9th versus 10th LCS game as data, sure, but like you start to say, well, this is G2's champion pool. Here's Wonder's champion pool because he played like 27 games. Man played himself a lot of Renekton. So really we're just measuring what does Wonder play. And that's not fair either. So that said though, I think reasonable to say, is Renekton probably going to be a very highly present champion at Worlds? Yeah, probably. So reasonable choice to make, right? Number 11 most present champion was Nautilus. Nautilus, definitely a pretty big deal. You can see his pick rate data moved all around. It went up and up and up and then back down, then back up. Again, this is LEC only. This is LCS, LCK only. Regions have different preferences. I think that's a good thing. But we nerfed even Shroud to 13.17. Nautilus tends to build the aggressive tank support item. But yeah, Nautilus is around at, sometimes middling, sometimes high presences. But this is a very acceptable measure for a tank support. If not Nautilus, then who? I mean, again, we nerfed some Rel, so we think Nautilus is probably going to go up a little bit. We're keeping Rakan pretty strong. Rakan should probably be of Nautilus, but some leagues, and there's a bunch of Braum in the LEC. There's a bunch of Alistair in the LCK. It kind of depends on what league you're playing. The LPL really, really likes their Nautilus. That's why 13.30 is such a heavy presence, because this is just a ton of LPL postseason, but not LCK, LCS postseason. So there's just way more games in LPL here. And so they heavily weight the data to their side. So is LPL going to play a bunch of Nautilus? Yeah. Does it mean he's going to be the board support at Worlds? Probably not. Okay, then we're probably fine. And that's the 75% presence cutoff, right? Top 11 champions back in 13.13. And for the vast majority of the champions, we directly nerf them or, meaningfully nerf an item that they definitely use. Okay. And aside on one league data, by the way, we talked about the fact that, hey, this guy's really present because of the LPL. Well, here's the thing about using data for only one league. Here's Caitlyn last year. So 13.1, to be fair, has both the main patch and the micro patch. So, okay, 59% presence on the sort of opening patch of the split. Okay, sure, of the year, I should say, right? This is Spring Split Caitlyn. All right, totally reasonable presence. Then we go to patch 13.13. We get a bunch of 13.13 data, and this means with this data, we have to lock patch 13.5. If we want to have any measurements for postseason, we've got to make the change now, because we start getting 30.30 data, and I'm like, hey, we should do this. And I remember that I personally suggested that we make Caitlyn changes, and so we did. We nerfed Caitlyn on 13.3 because we saw her presence skyrocketing, right? From one patch to the next, 88% presence, and if you look at the LCK, it was like 98. So I'm like, folks, we should really do this nerf. And we approved it. I shipped the changes. I lobbied for the change. We nerfed Caitlyn. We look at 13.4. Still a highly present AD carry. It wasn't just a one-patch aberration. The nerf hits, and she's still 28% present. Okay. And then it goes down to 2%, and then MSI is 0%. But, the LCK, which at this time had 3 out of 4 teams in semifinals at Worlds. They were both finalists. The LCK was the #1 league in the world, and they played Caitlyn a lot. And the funny thing is, the LCK played Caitlyn post-nerf. LCK had a 64% presence on Caitlyn in their playoffs. Their best teams, the ones that are going to MSI, still draft Caitlyn, pick ban, in 2/3 of their games after the nerf. Like, there's a reasonable argument to have nerfed Caitlyn a second time based on this, if we wanted to. Now, we didn't, and I'm glad we didn't. But as we saw, spoiler alert, 0% at MSI. At this point in time, LCK was the best league in the world based on recent tournament data. 3 out of 4 semifinalists, both finalists. Post-nerf, 64% presence. Just kidding, haha, Caitlyn doesn't matter. So you really, 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 really can't trust one league data. You really, 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 really can't. Because even if you make a change, they won't react all the way. They'll only drop 1/3 of their presence. And then they'll wait a little bit longer, then they'll actually just drop it entirely. All right, well, we have another patch, right? So 30.14, we get only 2 out of the 4 top leagues. LCK, of course, a stronger league than LCS, obviously. I don't put a lot of stock in LCS drafts. I think they are mostly followers. I think this is true. I don't think there's a lot of innovation coming out of the LCS, unfortunately. I wish they would. I think that's one of the only ways the LCS can get a competitive advantage internationally is to trust their analysts, have their analysts cook up something cool, and, you know, play something unique and interesting because, you know, this is like the Huhi Aurelian Soul back at MSI 2016 or whatever. The story I had heard is that Xiaohu literally didn't know what Aurelian Soul did when they played against CLG. That's hearsay. I'm going to repeat the hearsay that I had heard. That's what I had heard. Anyway, Tristana in 13.14, right? Multiple matches in a row now. Top dog, big deal. Nerfed from 13.16. Zaya, still top dog. Nerfed from 13.17. Or 18, whatever. Doesn't matter. She was nerfed. All the same. I think it was 18, yeah. Rel, still top dog. Yes, indeed. Okay, well, again, as mentioned, was nerfed to 0.15, nerfed to 0.17 with the Even Shroud, nerfed to 0.18 as well. 0.15, again, doesn't look like it's nerfed on tooltips, so people didn't actually change pro behavior. It's really hard to feel that your Rel does like 1% less damage, even though it does matter, even though it does affect win rate. No one's going to feel that over the short term playing a few scrims, so, you know, not really a change there. Kaisa, again, 88% presence. Actually, quite a bit lower, right? She was 94. Now she's only 88, but again, nerfed in she was nerfed in 0.15. I don't know why I keep typing this stuff. That's kind of weird. Sejuani, right? Still very high prio. Again, nerfed in 0.15, nerfed in the LEC playoffs. Rakan, once again, not making changes here. Azir's new. Azir showed up out of nowhere. So Azir was buffed in 13.11. In 13.11, he had a 44% presence. Then he had 61% presence. Then he had 69% presence. And he went to 79% presence in the LCK, LCS. And then, you know, down to 73. So, you know, we start to see Azir show up, right? We start to see Azir, but we're really only seeing, you know, a few, you know, from a few regions, really. But like, these are all very reasonable presence numbers, right? 60s is chilling. Yes, it's going up, but then, you know, you get more data and it actually goes down. Now, certainly Niski played Azir like literally every game he could, but that means that we're just really, really measuring Niski data because they went pretty far in the playoffs. So, is that fair? Are we measuring the right things? If we're saying that this presence is carried by exactly one player who played him every game, and the thing is, his opponents didn't care to ban it. They let him get it. I think there was a best of 5 where he played Azir literally all 5 games. I think that was lower bracket finals, I think. But like, okay, well, there's only one player who cares that much. Is he really 73% presence, or is it just a Niski champion? And the other teams are like, yeah, have him. We don't care. He's not that good. This is the problem with measuring playoffs and only one league. Is you're measuring literally one player sometimes, and it's not reasonable. So maybe Azir is actually the number, like, I don't know, 2 mid laner behind Tristana, and Tristana, of course, got directly nerfed to 0.16. Or maybe Azir is like a 70% presence champion, because it's the last time we saw every league, and it's just like, oh no, actually, just Faker and Niski really like Azir, and so we see it a lot more. Good luck. You got to make a choice. Have fun. And so the choice I chose to make was I want to make Crown less pro skewed in 13.18. That's the change. Have fun, folks. You can try to one-shot the Azir because he won't immune all of your damage during your Rakan CC or Rel CC combo. And that's the 70% cutoff, by the way. There's actually a quite diverse metagame. Only 7 champions. To be fair, there's only 2 leagues on this patch, just the LCK and LCS, but for those 2 leagues, we only had 7 champions with 3/4 presence or higher. Okay. And then we have 13.15, which is the last time we ever saw high-level pro play, and it's only the LEC. It's not even all their teams, and you're really, really going to overcount teams like Fnatic that play a lot of games and make deep runs. It makes it a little weird. But again, Rel was the number 1 champion. Now, again, this was after the bug fixes to Rel. I didn't expect it to have much of a pro presence change. It did not. But we nerfed Even Shroud and we nerfed Rel specifically in 13.18. So we think this will nudge Rel some. She will still be good. I expect Rel to still be a highly present champion in pro play. She will still be a jungle support flex. We chose to not crush Rel jungle, though we think it would have some pro impact, because some Rel players enjoy playing Rel jungle, and we decided that she should be allowed to have that. We're just going to do a more generic nerf. That's a choice that we made. Tristana was now only the number 2 champion in the LEC postseason. Again, her changes were in 0.16 to make her weaker into magic damage matchups. My hope is that the fact that she should be counterpickable by high damage magic damage champions should make this a reasonable change. That's the hope. Zaya was the number 3 champion. Again, we did nerf her in 13.18, but you'll notice Kaisa, LeBlanc, no longer up here on top on this list. And what's interesting is LeBlanc wasn't here either. the LeBlanc changes. Right, we scroll all the way back up. LeBlanc was a really, really big deal. We nerfed the AP ratio on Shiv, and she went for tied for first place to not in the top 10 and not in the top 10. So, hope that has impact. Again, Zaya, a big deal. Renekton, a big deal. But again, we're only measuring the LEC, and we're heavily measuring Fnatic games. But we are making a change to Renekton in 13.19. Ivern showed up. This is the patch where we made Smite not deal meaningful damage to champion summoned minions of any kind. We also made changes to make Night Harvester Ivern not as good because mid Ivern and top Ivern were very strong and very annoying self-shielding auto-attack quasi-mages, and said for the sanctity of solo queue, for the game to be fun for everyone else to play, we're going to nerf Ivern's AP ratios, and we're going to very lightly bump his shield. I guess a couple things, right? We're going to bump the base value of his shield. We're going to tweak the value of his W. Like, there were a lot of changes that were side grades. This brought Ivern jungle to about the same win rate, but shifted his builds back to Enchanter being as good as Mage. Since even Enchanter Ivern gets some AP, his items do have ability power on them. He does run some ability power on his stat shards and whatnot. Ivern support is 50% win rate. It's like, the changes landed very, very well for solo queue. But out of nowhere, Ivern in the LEC postseason is the number 5 champion. Now, do I think every other team in every other league is going to consider Ivern the number 5 champion in League of Legends? I do not. We definitely considered, I brought up the idea of an Ivern nerf and had discussions with other designers on the team, and we thought, you know what? I mean, we're betting that Ivern is not the actual best jungler in the game. LEC is definitely known for their really cool, interesting oddball picks. And that's the bet we're making. That Ivern is not actually going to be 100% pick ban at Worlds, because I don't think every team's actually going to play Ivern. I hope it's not the Caitlyn from LCK postseason, where it just disappears entirely. I hope it's not. Just kidding. Haha, Ivern's number 1 jungler. Worlds is the Ivern meta. I don't have a good way of knowing, to be honest. But it's a bet. It's a bet we're placing, and we are hoping, right? Meanwhile, Taliyah got buffed. Taliyah got jungle-specific buffs, and bam. It turns out, EU has quite a lot of their carry junglers, and so Taliyah ended up being the number 2. Now, to be fair, this is a jungle mid flex, to be clear. But, wow, Taliyah is just into the meta. She's into the meta above Azir. She's into the meta above LeBlanc. She's in the meta below Tristana, but this is before Tristana gets her MR nerfed. And Taliyah, with her, when you rocket jump, I press E, I win the fight, probably ends up being a very good counter when Tristana has less health and less MR. She can push waves, but certainly can't aggress. Maokai finally comes in at the arguably number 3 jungler. We're noting that up until now, Sejuani was above Maokai in the pick rate tier list, and now Maokai is the winning tank. Okay, Maokai is the number 2 or maybe number 3 jungler. Got some late nerfs. They're not very big, but yep, LEC is still playing Maokai. I think it's fine. They have a viable jungler. Here's Nautilus down here. And then finally, here's LeBlanc down at number 9. But again, there were still changes in 0.17 and 0.18 in Statikk Shiv. But hey, LeBlanc is now like the number, 3 mid laner. Not so extreme, but there. And then here's Rakan. Rakan, who is below Nautilus. Rakan, who is the number 3 support in pro play, right? Behind Nautilus. Behind a Rel, who admittedly is getting nerfed twice with an item and a change. But, Rakan is maybe not the number 1 support. Maybe that's okay. And here's a 75% cutoff. And we saw Kaisa drop from 94 way up here, right? In 0.13, she was 94. She was tied for the most played champ, most pick ban champ in the game. She was, I believe, a full 100% presence for the LPL postseason. She's at 58% here in the LEC. I think she's 4th place. She's behind Zaya. And she's behind Kalista, and I think one more. She's the number 3 or number 4 AD carry in this patch. That's fine. This seems more than reasonable. Looks like the changes from 0.15 actually landed very, very well. If LEC is any indication, this might be just fine. We might have gotten what we wanted. And here's Sejuani down at 48%. The Sejuani nerfs seem to have also gotten us where we wanted. Sejuani is clearly viable. She's in the metagame. She is not the top spot. Okay, right? Seems like we got a lot going in the correct direction here with the changes that the LEC played on. As a quick aside, here's what happened with Zeri. So at 13.11, Zeri was a 61% presence AD carry. She was, obviously on the strong side. We, of course, only had 13.10 data to go off of. And so for 13.12, we made some big changes. We got rid of her shield stealing. We moved the Q passive over to being her actual passive. We gave her some compensation on a crit ratio somewhere. We gave her some compensation on some base move speed. And despite all that, she went from 60% presence to 2. These changes deleted her from pro play, and honestly, cool. If Zeri gets to be like a 48% solo queue champion and isn't taking over pro, you know what? Cool, we have room to give her maybe a little bit more power later on. Maybe we can get her to 49, wait and see, you know, let the average Zeri player have an average amount of success. I think it's totally reasonable if you can do it. Otherwise, it means you have to get more mastery on your champion to succeed. That seems fine. Then she started climbing. Pros entirely abandoned, wait a second, maybe we can play her. And the LCK and the LCS said, you know what? Yeah, we can play her. And the LEC said, yeah, we can play her. And it's like, oh. Well, I don't really want to go back to a Zeri meta at Worlds. We've already had a lot of hyper carries coming in. And so, you know, 13.19, nerf. This means that Kaisa probably ends up being number one. Number one carry, AD carry. Keep in mind, in the LEC postseason, she is beneath Kalista at exactly this point in time, in this balance level. So, you know, Zaya going down, Zeri going down, we'll see. But yeah, if Kaisa is the best damage first, late game carry, AD carry, someone's got to be number one. I'm fine with it being Kaisa. Personally, fine with it being Kaisa. So then we go on to 13.16, and this is just a quick recap. It's going to be a much quicker sort of thing. Quick recap of, okay, well, we've taken all these notes at, like, what is getting played, what we saw out of the LEC, what we saw out of the LCK, what we saw out of the LPL, what we saw out of the LCS. What has changed since the postseason on these various leagues? Well, the nerfs are only counting things that we actively saw a lot of in pro play. I did not include nerfs for things like Jarvan or Kayn or Kha'Zix, though we did see some Kha'Zix. G2 played it a little bit. I'm saying here are nerfs for things that pro play actively played a lot of, and here are buffs for things that we have seen pro play take a liking to before. So this is not every buff and nerf. We have not power crept the game this severely. I actually looked in terms of specific number of changes, is not measuring severity at all. We have done 15% more buffs than nerfs this calendar year. It's not an extreme amount, but technically more buffs than nerfs. Random thing, I saw the data earlier today. We've very lightly, if you don't count magnitude at all, which of course is fraudulent, we have buffed more than we have nerfed to the tune of 15%. So, you know, for every 100 nerfs, 115 buffs. Okay. This is like individual changes, right? So like if someone lost, you know, 10 base damage on Q and gained 5 damage on E, that would look at 1-to-1. So random thought, but anyway, moving on. Okay. So Tristana, right? The top spot mid laner in pro play for several patches, gets some base health gone, gets some base MR gone. Big deal here. And we buffed a lot of champions that we might see in pro play, right? Akali, Echo, Sylas, right? High damage assassin mid laners. Interestingly, all of these might be decent in Tristana if they can kind of weave their way in, try to burst. Tristana is intentionally meant to be a little bit more burstable, so it could happen. Nidalee got some small buffs in 13.16. Pretty small. This was, I think, the AD ratio on swipe, so it's probably going to be fake. But regardless, you know, a change there. The bigger thing is the fact that even though we didn't change every AD carry out, like we hit Kaisa the one time, we hit Zaya the one time, we hit Zeri the one time, Kalista is already good, and Caitlyn and Lucian got buffed to the point where there are now several good lane bullies. We know we see some Draven in pro play. Caitlyn was clearly a big deal back in spring and could come back. Lucian, after getting decoupled from Nami, gets quite a bit more power, could easily come back. And though we definitely pushed ourselves off of the Enchanter meta, when we had made changes to a lot of these champions, we got rid of the, I would say, low skill expressive on the supports side bits and tried to make them try a little bit harder. So hopefully they be, even if they are getting played and are, you know, in and around Worlds, maybe they're going to be a little bit flashier. And so these were largely damage buffs to these characters, trying to buff them in ways that were not going to pro skew buff them again. But we did bring up some enchanters a little bit to say, hey, there's a few options here, maybe lurking in the shadows, maybe consider a few enchanters to change the metagame around a little bit. But again, not trying very hard because enchanters being really, really strong, especially if they're unkillable, had really severe repercussions for making pro play quite stale and all about hyper carries. So these were kind of light touches as far as pro play is concerned. 30.17 had changes. A nerf to Even Shroud is a nerf to engage tanks. This does mean that we buff some enchanters, we had nerfed some engage tanks, certainly going in this direction of opening up enchanters a bit more. Back at MSI, if you consider Rakan primarily an engage tank, we had roughly 2-to-1 pick rate engage tanks to supports. I thought that ratio was pretty reasonable, and we're edging back that way since it's pretty much 90-10, I think, right now, or something. It's like a little bit of Lulu, a little bit of Melia, a little bit of all that stuff, but, you know, very, very little bits of it. So, again, touches up, touches down. but a significant number of buffs that, or just overall changes that should have a pretty big impact. So the top lane metagame gets Aatrox reintroduced with converting his passive and W into magic damage and buffing an item like Gore Drinker. Aatrox playing as a primary or secondary frontline and not a full lethality build could easily bring Aatrox back into the fold. Gnar got some flat damage gains. Tryndamere got his attack range buff, and then, you know, minus some AD, minus some health. Quinn ended up getting a sizable amount of power off of nerfing the late game spells, but buffing her overall durability. Quinn, as a Renekton counter, has been picked before. Maybe she comes back as well again. Meanwhile, we had a buff to Elise. We had changes to Vi and Xin Zhao that ended up being power positive. We may see these fighters back at Worlds as well. So even though we did see a lot of Ivern, we did see a lot of Maokai late into the split, there are some good fighters and other early game champions that can maybe just come right back in and create a pretty healthy situation there. And as far as meta is concerned, even though Tristana has been in the top spot, even though Azir may be challenging for it, LeBlanc certainly around in the wings, Orianna, TF, Vex, Zoe all got buffed as well. Some of these are quite small. Orianna ended up getting like 1.5% win rate generically. The rest of these were pretty minor, to the tune of about 1% win rate, but hey, some mid laners to look at, and maybe some more spice here in the mid lane as well. I think overall skewing a mid lane toward mages tends to work. I would love to see assassins in pro play, and hey, we do have the like Akali, Echo, Sylas changes from earlier, if you want to argue that Sylas is kind of an assassin. But considering that bot laners mostly refuse to play anything but marksman, I am loath to have marksman be the best champion type generically in any other role, since you aren't guaranteed to see a mage every game, you aren't guaranteed to see a tank every game, you aren't guaranteed to see an assassin every game, you aren't guaranteed to see a fighter every game, you aren't guaranteed to see a enchanter every game, but you are guaranteed to see a marksman every game, pretty much. It's very, very rare that you don't see something like that. So getting a second marksman, not on my list of things to heavily prioritize. So in general, if mid lane is mages and assassins for the most part at Worlds, that's probably still the healthiest for having more varied games and is overall a positive thing. And there were systems updates to Gore Drinker, Shojin, and Stridebreaker. Of course, Shojin directly buffed things like Xin Zhao, directly buffed things like Jarvan. It moved Hecarim's builds around a whole bunch as well. But overall, the fact that these items got buffed, and actually one more thing, this is Jungle Ketchup XP. This ended up actually having a pretty big deal. There were several tank junglers who actually lost quite a bit of win rate, to the tune of around like 0.75% this patch, because of things like, oh, they're turbo gankers who don't farm ever, and so they frequently get catch-up XP, or they're against fighters building things like Gore Drinker and Stridebreaker, and so, you know, their opponents are stronger. So even though we didn't directly nerf Maokai, a lot moved around to make Maokai a weaker champion in the jungle. So I wouldn't be surprised if a fighter was the #1 champion at Worlds this year. 13.18, of course, came out last week. We directly nerfed Rel. We directly nerfed Zaya. Zaya got some compensation. Her health comes back at later levels. Her E stops being nerfed at character level 9. But still, these were nerfs overall to the champions. We then buffed Gwen top. We buffed Aurelia. We buffed Kennen. We buffed Gwen jungle. We made changes to Crown. It's not going to do a whole lot, but it probably does knock Azir down a peg. Azir is the primary Crown abuser. And we made buffs to Bard, Senna, and Thresh. And all these champions have a chance of being seen in pro play as a result, so we'll see what happens. The biggest impact here is that crit builds on Senna got a whole lot stronger by removing the crit damage penalty on her kit. This ended up being under 1% win rate to support generically, and close to about 2% and change win rate to bot lane, so that I think bot lane Senna is like 49 and change, and support Senna is like 50.5 or something like that generically for solo queue win rate. The fact that this disproportionately buffs crit builds means that we might indeed see teams play around Senna at Worlds this year. And then patch 13.19 got previewed on Twitter, or X, whatever, by Phreak, who is my boss, and here are the champions that we have slated for changes in this patch. Looking at pro changes, we are nerfing Renekton, we are nerfing Zeri. Again, the thought that Zeri might overtake as the number one late game damage carry bot laner. This is somewhat choosing favorites and saying I would rather it be Kaisa and Aphelios than Zeri. Reason being, the more these champions are one-shottable, the more variance you have. You may have put all your eggs in the basket, but you know what? If you can't shut down the Zaya, they just win because they put all their resources into the Zaya in bot lane, and you try to dive her, and she presses R, and it's like, well, they just keep winning. There's no volatility here. There's no pick potential. There's no Maokai flash W. at least in this case, you have to run cleanse. If you're Zeri or Kaisa or someone else, you try to gank Zeri, nah, she eats over the wall, right? And so there's a certain amount of like champions with really, really good escapes, especially their primary carries. I think are acceptable to sit at slightly lower resting win rates, and I think in general create a better viewer experience if they don't have all the agency to escape when you try to counter the fed squishy member on the enemy team. But significant other buffs and changes. Randuin's Omen, a substantial increase to its power, 10% off its gold cost, is the current change on PvE right now to say, look, if you are going to play double crit marksman, now certainly some comps can be Tristana plus like on hit or AP Zaya, sure, but Kaisa. I said Zaya, I meant Kaisa. But in all the other cases where your bot lane marksman does deal crit, Randuin's Omen is a very strong outlet to say, well, we can buy this first or second item. You know, it's like Bombies into Randuin's into finish my Even Shroud or Radiant Virtue or whatever if I'm like Maokai or Sejuani Jungle or something. But as an option to say, you know what? They play double marksman. We're going Ornn. I'm buying Steel Caps. I'm buying Randuin's, and I'm going to be invincible. We're gonna play Ornn. We're gonna play Malphite. We're gonna play Scion. I'm gonna buy Randuin's and I'm gonna be invincible. Here is the outlet for your double crit team. That's like the entire point here. This item should be good for serving its purpose. It currently does not. So a large buff here. Seeker's Arm Guard is, I mean, this item is actually just bad. This is a good thing for solo queue. Just to have an outlet against a more fed physical damage assassin or mid laner, but also says, look, you know, if we still see a lot of Jace, we still see a lot of Tristana because we have no way of measuring the impact of the Tristana changes, well, you have a way to give yourself even more armor in the matchup to make sure you win the 1v1 and that Tristana can't threaten you as heavily. Buffing Gangplank is not doing too well in solo queue, and we might see even pro play. Lee Sin not doing too well in solo queue, might see even pro play. Gallia, Lissandra, Syndra, and Ziggs, all mid laners who, in many cases, are not doing very, very well. We know Ziggs is pretty good in bot lane already. I have a longer term plan for addressing mages being overperforming in bot lane that we probably see on a seasonal level update, but I'm actually pretty confident it's going to be a good set of changes. But in the meantime, yes, it means Ziggs is going to be a rather strong bot laner. Okay, maybe we see him at Worlds. Ziggs mid, I think reasonable there as well. Actually, we are, sorry, I just remembered, we're actually not doing Ziggs' patch. We are going to do different changes for a little bit later. Ziggs actually not in. Sorry to correct myself there. We discussed it earlier on in the day, and I just remembered that what the results of our discussion was. And yeah, we're doing a buff to Jhin and a buff to Twitch with the idea of, hey, turn some heads. Look at this champion. Is the champion good? Again, more variants, more interesting stuff, more unique picks in the metagame. And Pyke has been suffering for a while. We've held off because we kept changing assassin items around, but now that those items have settled, Pyke's not in a good spot, and we're just going to buff Pyke. So a preview of the world's meta, right? Things moving around from what has already happened, and yeah, I mean, a lot has changed since you last saw playoffs. I saw the Reddit thread around the 30.19 preview, and there was like a lot of comments I saw around like, oh, I guess the world's meta isn't changing, but like, I don't know. There's a whole lot moving around here. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I'm excited to watch the World Championship in a very short amount of time, just a couple of weeks. See you there. Bye.